Welcome to the Deconstructed Woman podcast, a podcast about breaking down barriers between women, exploring and sharing perspectives of each individual woman's experience, and discovering what we have in common and what makes us different. Hosted by Elisa Marie and Joji.
Welcome to the next episode of The Deconstructed Woman. Today we're going to be talking about social media and the impact it has on women and our mental health and our mood. This was a topic that was suggested by one of our listeners, Sue, who responded to Alyssa's question on Facebook about what are we struggling with at the moment. And Sue had said something about being inundated with social media and how that has sort of created a place of stress and anxiety. I think if I remember correctly, that's what her comment was. And so we thought that that was a great topic for us because we do have so much social media in our lives, and it's hard to turn off social media when you're using even a small part of it. And so Alyssa Marie and I actually did some research and talked about, well, why is this such an important topic? And, where do we go from here? And so, Alyssa, I'm going to turn it over to you. What are your thoughts about this? Why did this topic resonate with you? Open us up for this conversation.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that social media in general, so I have to kind of preface this by Facebook was, I think of like Facebook. Obviously there's a lot of different social media platforms, but Facebook's the one that comes to mind right out the gate. And it developed right when I was in college. And so for me, it's always been a part of my life. It's always been a part of my existence and my there's always been a social media presence. And it's always interesting to me when I meet people who don't have social media. I'm like, wow, that's amazing. I don't know what that would look like. For the longest time, I was running a business on social media. And so it was like, well, I have to have it because that's how I connect with people. And that is a way I get a lot of information. But I think that there's also, everybody calls it the scroll. And it's honestly when I wake up in the morning and I kind of a little bit ashamed to say it, but I wake up and I roll over and I check my email and check Facebook just to see what's going on, over the last 24 hours. And then I start my day. And I think that, there's a lot of people out there that say that's not the most beneficial way to start. And it's something that I'm like, okay, could I not do that? Is there ways to change that? But I do feel like that is part and it's just there. And I just heard the other day, like people were saying how, and maybe it was part of our conversation too, but when you have that downtime, like you're waiting in line, can see so much information out there. And I think that we were talking about maybe this being a shorter episode, but now that I'm starting to dive into it, I realize that there's just so many facets of this. So we might have to split it up because there is so many ways in which social media can be stressful. And I think that it touches us in a lot of different areas, whether it's, right after some devastating event, you're getting hit constantly by people talking about things. Political, arguments and discussions are typically done over social media. And so we just see so much out there that I think that creates that environment of stress. And I think that I haven't asked any of the people who don't have social media, but I wonder if they would say that they at least don't have that stressor in their life.
Well, I will say that I was definitely a person who did not have social media for the longest time. So I wasn't an early adopter of Facebook. Actually, my family makes fun of me because I'm a late adopter of Facebook. I barely know how to use Facebook, and partly there's a real reason for that. Just from a safety perspective, I didn't necessarily want people to know where I was, just to protect myself from being maybe stalked or found like that. But there's definitely is less stress with not being on Facebook for sure. For me, I find that I really didn't have anything that was always grabbing my attention. And now that I am on social media, I'm on TikTok because I do the TikTok recap every time we're done with an episode. And so I feel like my notifications are always on and I'm always paying attention to them. And so I can see how addictive it is because you want to see what all those notifications mean. And most of the time they have of no value and they're useless, but it does give you something to do. And I definitely think that if I have 30 seconds to a minute that I'm waiting for something, the first thing I'm going to do is take my phone out and I'm going to start looking at it. But the thing about, what we are talking about is not just needless distraction, which is really what social media is good for. But as you alluded to, I mean, there's a lot of stress that goes along with it. Some of the tensest people I know are people who get their news on their phone. They're people who do all their interactions are by social media through their phone or tablet or social device. And so I definitely think there is a tie-in between social media and stress and anxiety. And I think we saw that a lot in the last, I would say, maybe 4 to 6 years, not only with, the political environment changing, but also COVID and keeping on top of what all the rules and regulations were for restrictions and things like that. So we read an article, Alyssa, you and I read an article by ThriveWorks, and it was talking about social media and women's mental health, positive and negatives. It's written by Jason Crosby, and it was published in May of 2022. And what this article really talks about, interestingly enough, is that women, there are 72% of the population are on social media of some sort. Women are primarily the users of social media because we have large social networks. And as a result of that, we spend more time connecting with those networks using social media. Not a hard, not a far stretch to imagine what they're saying, because I think all of that does make sense. And given the fact that so much marketing and things are targeted towards women, because we are the consumers. So women make a lot of decision making about what we're buying for a household and things like that. So there's a lot of targeted messages towards women as a consumer. And then on top of that, if you look at the article talks about Instagram and body image, which is the topic that we just recently spoke about, and how women are inundated with messages about body image and what to wear and what not to wear and how to look younger and how to look prettier and, all this kind of thing. And so there's a lot of reason why I think for us as women that our moods can be very much shifted by social media, because you can feel the pleasure and love of connecting with somebody you haven't talked to in a long time. And at the same time, you can look at messages that make you feel bad about yourself, whether it's your shape or whether it's your look or whether it's you don't look in vogue today or whatever it is. There's lots of ways that it can also hurt you in the process of just checking in, and you don't realize that when you pick up this little box, it's going to set your mood for the next X amount of time. And so it really is a mixed bag. And I completely understand when Sue suggested, her comment about feeling inundated and feeling overwhelmed, because social media is a way that people can, get in front of you 24/7, depending on how disciplined or not disciplined you are with letting this control your life. So it really is a mixed bag. It truly is. And I think, Alyssa, as you're a millennial and you were brought up with Facebook, I mean, it was really born in your generation. How have you found it easy or hard to put the phone down or to get away from social media? Is that something you have to be disciplined about, or is that something that comes easy to you? Do you think that when you have children, you have less time, so maybe it is less available to you? How has it, tell me about how social media has sort of changed in your life, given the fact that you were, the new age with it, but now you've got children and you're really busy. So how do you navigate social media today?
I think it's a really big challenge because you can limit how much time you do have on social media. Now, I will tell you that on a daily basis, I override that because I know my passcode. So, not really helpful, but it is a little bit of a little reminder. So, I think I give myself like maybe like an hour, maybe two. I don't remember what the limit is. But every time it pops up and says you've reached your limit for today, it's like, okay, that means I've probably been on it, at least an hour for that day. I've taken off notifications so I don't get the little dings all day long. Um, and so that's been helpful. But all in all, I think for me, I really try to make sure and to be very mindful of when I am using my phone and when I'm not. And so a lot of times it'll be like after dinner is done and the kids, we've cleaned up and I'm doing dishes and I'm just checking like right before we go into bedtime routines or something like that, or once everybody's in bed and I'm laying down for the evening and just kind of settling back in. And like I said, very early in the morning. And so there's these pockets of time where I will look at it, but throughout the day, I really try to stay off of it. So at work, I have the work zone on my phone, so it blocks everything. Again, you can override it, but it blocks so that I'm only getting calls from like immediate family and things like that, and not getting notifications. So I try to be really mindful because I know that it's a time suck. Like if you really allow it, it can really take so much time out of your day. And I hear so many people say, I don't have enough time in my day. And then, I've read articles about, well, look, because again, most phones really tracks that for you. Again, I know the iPhone does a whole analysis of which apps you're using and how often, whatnot. And if you really look at it, it's probably 2 to 3 hours a day that you're just on your phone. So I have tried to consciously limit it, but I think that was something that I wasn't really aware of probably before kids, because before it was like I can be on my phone whenever I want. I can, it doesn't impact anybody other than myself. But now I don't want to be scrolling through Facebook and my kids are asking me to read them a book. I want to be present with them. I want them to feel like I'm there. And so that's been a shift for me more recently, I would say in the last 8 years or so. Um, but I think that it is still hard. I don't watch the news, so I get a lot of information from social media. I purposely don't watch the news because I think that there's positives out there, but there's a lot of negatives too, and it just gets really daunting to watch it. So I don't have cable and I don't watch the news. And so, if there's been some event in uh during the day, I usually see it crossed on social media and then I'll click on it or, look up an article and figure it out. So in some ways, I'm disconnected, but in other ways, I am very connected as well.
I have a question for you because you have young children. I think that's one of the things that I am most conflicted about is what is the role of social media with children, and at what age do you introduce your child to social media? And I guess I'm thinking about my grandson, and he'll watch videos on YouTube or something like that. I don't know if YouTube is considered social media. It probably is in the strictest definition, but I think screen time is something that I've heard. I mean, for 20 years, parents have tried to limit screen time, whether it's TV time before the rise of the internet, or now kids with their own tablets and their own devices, and so as you're sort of going into, your daughters in primary school, and what are the how are you navigating social media with at least your daughter or your other kids in terms of how much screen time they have, and does it make you think about what kind of behaviors are you promoting or withholding when it comes to screen time? Because I think it's a double-edged sword, and I can see that.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard different opinions. Me personally, I want to keep my children off social media as long as possible. But I'm okay with juveniles and children who are misinformed about what you can and can't do on social media. And so I definitely am coming from the approach of educating my children and letting them know that, this is not something that you play around with. This is not something that you joke around about. There are serious consequences for misusing it or not being aware of how that's going to influence you. So that's been my approach. Probably more than two camps out there, but for me, I'm gonna, they know about it, that, you know, I show them pictures like, oh, look, posting this, or, you know, whatnot. Their cousins are much older than them, so they are aware of it. But luckily, it hasn't come to that point where they're like, I want to get a, you know, social. I haven't crossed that bridge yet. But again, my plan is to keep them away from it until they have the maturity to know how to use it properly.
Yeah, I will definitely say that I went down that road with, with my child too, where you're going into high school and, using the phone and posting photos and sharing photos. And you really have to warn your children, right, that, it's out in the world. If you post a photo, it's out in the world. And that, there's going to come a time where you're going to be applying for a job. And, routinely now, employers do look up Facebook pages of children, people who are applying for jobs, not children, but when you apply for a job, because you sort of get to see their personal life. And if kids, as they grow older, look for part-time jobs or whatever, go to college, they need to know that that's a public space, and what they publish on their social media pages are viewable by most people unless they make it private. And I don't think that what seems like cute and fun in high school is really not what an employer wants to see online, representing them, or the candidate that they're viewing. And it's very hard, I think, to tell a 15 or 16-year-old, 17-year-old, that's not something you want to publish. I mean, there are certain things. It's like teaching them privacy all over again, but in a whole different way, because the scope of social media is so public that it's not like taking photos and a couple of people seeing them. Now it's like it's up for public consumption, and nothing is ever actually deleted. And I will also say that there's been situations where young people don't understand that because you're in a relationship and you post photos um, of intimate moments, say, or something like that, that's not going to come back. I've also had people who've been hurt by their ex-partners now publishing photos inappropriately because they're angry that the breakup took place. And as you talk to your kids about the warnings of these things, they think it'll never happen to them, and then it happens. And so it's really something that is, very difficult, and it's unfortunate that we have to figure out how to talk to our children about these things. But definitely, you can see um, how it can impact people. And when my daughter was in middle school, and we had cyberbullying going on, where there was, making fun of other children using social media, and that was devastating. And so it really is like everything has a purpose for good, and somehow or other it gets manipulated for bad. And all of these things impact our mental health and impact the way that we feel about ourselves and the place we have in the world. And so I clearly see it, or it can be used to tear people down. And we're so protective of our children, and we want our children to be safe. And it's getting harder and harder to, I think, keep that line very clear, and not to become the hated parent in a new way, because now you won't let your child have a phone or have social media. And so these are really challenging topics, but ultimately it's to protect our kids and to protect ourselves from falling prey to, people, faceless people who impact our mood on a daily basis. So, yeah, very significant conversation.
Yeah, and I would say that I think that that's part of, I mean, a lot of things that you said are kind of going back to why it's so stressful, is because it is, it's out there. And so a lot of times, I think I have really, there's plenty of times I want to say things, and whether it's be like, this is just something I'm thinking about, or, you know, to circumstances or events that are going on in the world or things like that, and I don't put them out there. And as much as I would like to have my voice be heard in that way, I know that there's going to be somebody else with a different opinion who's going to turn really, really negatively really quickly. I've seen that in a lot of Facebook groups. Like, that was something that we talked about when we created our Facebook group, was that we wanted to make sure that it was a positive, because there's so many times when topics are put out there, somebody says something very benign and not, one way or another, and then somebody else twists it, and it just becomes this hellfire of a conversation where people are, taking one side or the other, and it's just like that's the kind of thing that creates stress because people, I think what you said, like the faceless people, I think that people sometimes feel more encouraged to say what they think on social media because you're not saying it to their face. It's a really scary thing that happens too, is that people all of a sudden now putting their opinions out there and coming at you and you know, in ways that I don't think we would have done in person, or maybe I don't know, maybe people would have more class off social media. But I really see that those arguments just turn into just a mess. And I stay as far away from them. I remember I had a friend maybe a couple weeks ago that was like, there's this argument going on in one of our groups. Do you think I should jump in? I was like, no, do not jump in, because, well, for anybody who puts their 2 cents in those kind of situations, because, if you don't have thick skin, it's going to hurt you in some ways. And it's so interesting because we talk about, you know, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Well, they do hurt. They hurt. And it's such an, we've evolved to have this, kind of faceless social media presence where you can do so much with just a couple of words. So I think that makes it stressful as well. People don't have, again, the opportunity to take it back. It's out there. Even if you delete the post, somebody else screenshotted it and it's out there. And it's going to come back to haunt you. And I was just having a conversation with my husband, I think it was either today or yesterday, about a coach who had said something on Twitter, I believe, trouble. And I was like, if you're going to be in the spotlight, you really make sure that you're not saying things. I think that's all part of the stress too that we experience.
I get stressed out. I'm on social media apps, and when I see somebody take something the wrong way, and then you start to follow the replies and everything, and everybody jumps on board, I get really stressed out because, and I'm not even part of the conversation, I'm just an onlooker passing by, and I usually delete that post because I feel my stress. I feel it happening in my body, and I just think to myself, I don't know these people, I don't care about this topic. Why am I feeding into it by even reading it? Like, it's almost like, just ignore it. Like when your parents used to tell you when you were a kid, just ignore your brother. That way he'll stop bothering you. I sort of feel like I have to renew those rules and say, just stop looking at it. Because on one hand, it sucks you in. But on the other hand, I can physically feel my body tensing up, or, my breathing getting restricted or whatever. And I just think to myself, it's not worth it. I don't know these people. I don't care what they're talking about. And why am I giving them my attention when it doesn't deserve it? And so definitely there's a lot of stress with social media and how they grab you. And, it's like the fastest, sort of, I think, hit of adrenaline, because you get caught up in it and then you realize, oh my gosh, things get out of control so fast, like you said. And so I think it's a good reminder to be like, social media there's great reasons, there's great opportunities. I love LinkedIn. I love using it as a professional business tool. I love, Indeed, the search engine. I recommend young people look on it for jobs all the time. There's lots of great things. There's meditation apps. There's ways to do mindfulness. There's yoga. There's all sorts of wonderful things. And that's what we have to remember, is to use it in a balanced approach, because otherwise you are going to get overwhelmed and stressed out, especially if you're a news junkie. I mean, if you want to watch, you have it right up by your bedside every day, all day long. And I think that it can really take a hit on you and your emotional state. So you have to be careful. But yeah, I think it's time to close out this topic. And so, Alyssa, do you have any final thoughts before we say goodbye?
Yeah, the only thing that came to mind was, I mean, I know that we're talking about in a recent episode pruning, and I think that obviously we're using it in the term of friendships, but I think that this is also a good example of ways in which, like you were just giving the example of, you just delete that post. I think that a lot of times I follow people who create that positivity and I unfollow people that don't. And so it's okay to, I don't know that there's any hard and fast rules for how to use it. That you can very much create that same environment and what you're seeing day to day. Like if I see somebody post something on social media, a political rant, if you will, I will probably unfollow that person just because that's creating the type of um, environment that I don't want to put myself in. I don't, like you were saying, that tension. I don't want that tension in my life. And so I think that that's something that we can do again. Like we have control over this. There's a lot of things we don't have control over in our lives, but this is something that you do. And so you can go into your social media, limit who you're watching, who you're following, what's in your feed on a day-to-day basis. And the nice thing about it is you can say, like, you know what, I don't want this. You can tell Facebook or Instagram, I don't want to see more of these ads, or I don't want to see more of this. And it, the algorithm will figure it out. So, I think that that's just something that I want to leave our listeners with, is that this isn't just kind of, you mindlessly have to have everything in front of you. You can and create an environment that you want to have. So that's my last 2 cents on that. But I think that we can probably use that term. That term's going to come back up, I'm sure.
I think it's great advice, Alyssa, and I think that pruning is going to be like it's going to be a mainstay of our conversation. We're going to be dropping that term a lot, but I really like the idea of pruning social media, because I think it's going to keep us mentally and physically strong and safe. And while you were talking, I was thinking about how if I spend a lot of time on social media because of all the negative messages out there, I actually become very fearful as well. It really does incite fear in me, and some ways for me to is to limit that. And so there are all these wide range of emotions that it can do for us, but I like the idea of pruning things that no longer serve. And so I think social media there's a role in pruning for social media, as you pointed out. I think it's great advice. And so with that, we're going to sign off here from the Deconstructed Woman podcast. Please join us on Facebook and request to join our community so you can have conversations like these when we're offline. And keep an eye out for our My TikTok recaps, which is something I do usually, also called the same thing, the Deconstructed Woman. It's got a shorter title, but look us up and find us where you can listen to our conversation sort of post live. So with all that, I'm saying goodbye, and until next time, we'll talk to you soon. Bye. Thank you for listening to our podcast, The Deconstructed Woman. If you liked this podcast, please share it with your friends, rate this episode, or subscribe to be notified of all new content. We want to hear from you, our listener. Do you have thoughts on the discussions we're having? Want to share topic suggestions, or want to join us for a topic that you're passionate about? Contact us at our email address, thedeconstructedwoman@gmail.com.